Oh, Phil Twyford.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I want to encourage the Minister in the Chair to take a call, because for a couple of reasons. One is that the House is not giving this bill the benefit of a select committee process. And there are certain questions, a number have already been raised, that I think deserve an answer from the Minister. And I know this is not his bill. He's not Minister of Local Government, he's not Minister for the Environment. We heard a bit of a pitch last night in his opening speech, which I think was an audition for the role of Local Government Minister. And he knows about local government. I mean, he's a former councillor in the old Auckland city. He might even be considering a new career in local government. It's quite possible. And I think that it would be good for this debate if the Minister would as H.V. Ross Robertson used to say, get up on his hind legs and answer one of... And courtesy is contagious. and answer one or two questions that have been put to him. So I look forward to the Minister taking a call. Mr Chairman, I want to speak to my tabled amendment to Clause 7. But first let me just, to provide the context, on the question of the hearings panel and appointments to the hearings panel, Section 16, subsection 1 of the Principal Act provides that the Minister for the Environment and the Minister of Conservation are to establish a hearings panel comprising the chairperson and 3 to 7 members. That section also provides that ministers may appoint additional members after the initial appointment of members, so long as the total number is no more than 7 members plus the chairperson. So that's the status quo, that's as things stand. Well, what this bill does is it increases the maximum number of members that can be appointed to the panel, and members have already rehearsed the reasons why, that we need more flexibility, we need more concurrent hearings, and therefore a bigger pool of members is going to aid that outcome. But what the bill does through Clause 7, it allows that the Minister can appoint the additional members to a maximum of 10 plus the chairperson only after consulting a number of other people. And this is, I think, where it gets interesting. It says they've got to consult the Auckland Council, whose plan it is, the democratically elected representatives of the people of Auckland who have to live with the consequences of this plan, also the Independent Māori Statutory Board and the chairperson of the hearings panel. So my question, first question that I want to ask the Minister, the Honourable Sam Lotuinga, is why the Minister of Conservation? Why? Why? I mean, Maggie Barry has a lot of opinions on a lot of things, but is she an expert on urban development? Is she an expert on town planning? Is she an expert on environmental law in the RMA? And I suspect the answer is no. And I'll just give you a little insight into how much the Minister of Conservation understands about matters of local government and planning. This is the Minister who was recently quoted in the North Shore Times Advertiser, her local rag, complaining about the level of spending on public transport by Auckland Council. And she was asked if she uses public transport, and she said, well, she would, but she can never find a car park at the park and ride by the Bayswater Ferry. Just can't find a car park. That's her excuse for not using public transport. Well, Heather Duplessis-Allen from TV3's The Story programme went and stepped out the distance between Maggie Barry's house and the ferry terminal, the Bayswater Ferry. The distance is less than 500 metres. So Maggie Barry, the Minister of Conservation, who this bill lays down as one of the two decision makers to appoint the panel, that's how much, that really shows her affinity with and understanding with local government matters, because obviously, you know, public transport's a critical factor. So, Minister, why? Why the Minister of Conservation? And I would really appreciate that explanation. If we were putting this bill, if we were running it through the normal select committee process, we'd have the opportunity to ask these questions. And the officials would, Mr Chairman? Mr Chairman?
Oh, full twice.
Thank you, Mr Chairman.
But let's come back to the bill rather than ministers walking here.
Rather than Maggie Barry?
Rather than ministers walking here.
Yes, okay. So that was my first question. Why is the Minister of Conservation one of the decision makers here? I mean, I can understand why you would have the Minister of Environment being a decision maker, but what my tabled amendment does, Mr Chairman, is that it would require the decision to be made jointly by the Minister of the Environment, representing the Executive, Central Government, and the Mayor of Auckland, someone who has arguably the biggest electorate of voters in the country, who's elected at large across the entire region and accountable to the people of Auckland. Why not make it a joint decision and reflect the kind of spirit of partnership that we've heard in some of the brief contributions from government members in this debate? It was interesting to hear Joanne Hayes say, oh, this is a good bill, basically allows local councils to get on with their job. Well, that's not a philosophy we've heard articulated from the government members any time in the last 7 years. What we've seen, and Ron Marks spoke about that earlier in this debate, that local government has been the sort of whipping boy of choice for the national government for the entire last 7 years. And the decision in the principal legislation to have central government appointing all of the members of the panel typified the kind of government knows best, running Auckland from their luxury offices in Wellington because the government knows best and they don't really care, even though it's the people of Auckland who have to live with this plan and live with the consequences. So you can see it actually when you look back through the local government agenda of this government over 7 years. We had Rodney Hyde right through to the way this bespoke planning process for the unitary plan was put in place. And the appointment of the commissioners, I think, is emblematic of this government's attitude. And I think that it would be, if the members opposite are true to their rhetoric about working with government, and we've already said in this debate, they've been dragged kicking and screaming over the last 7 years, finally to some kind of acknowledgement that they have to work with Auckland. And this bill, and the reason that we're supporting this bill is that it is practical. It is about, the Auckland Council have asked for these provisions because they want to get the unitary plan put to bed before the local government elections next year. So this bill is worth supporting for that reason, notwithstanding the objections raised by our Green Party colleagues. But I would urge the government to think seriously about this tabled amendment and consider allowing the appointment of the panel members to be made jointly by the Mayor of Auckland and by the Minister for the Environment, who I think is probably the logical person to do that. It was interesting in Richard Harmon's blog post this morning. He points out that David Seymour, who made a contribution earlier this morning in this debate, is talking about reopening up and reviewing the super city legislation, which really is the platform for any kind of consideration of this debate. The unitary plan is the big kahuna that basically flows on from the establishment of the super city. It was a bespoke process, never really attempted something on this scale, spatial plan on the scale of the Auckland unitary plan, and would be unkind to say they're making it up as they go along, but
they're making it up as they go along.
They are, in fact, making it up as they go along. And this bill, rectifying drafting errors from the earlier legislation, validating, and we'll talk some more about the validation clauses later, retrospective validation clauses later in this debate. It is a kind of a Heath Robinson contraption, this whole bespoke process. So, Mr Chairman, I would ask the House, and particularly the government members, and I see we've got a new minister in the chair now, I would ask her to take a call. We didn't hear once from the minister who preceded her in the chair, but I assume she's been briefed. We haven't had the benefit of a select committee process. We haven't had any substantive contributions from government members.
Sewer William Seal.
Mr. Chairman,